Welcome to our podcast, Living Our Best with Memory Loss. What makes this podcast unique is that 3 of its hosts, Bob, Dennis, and Sue Ann, have a memory loss diagnosis. The purpose of this podcast is for people to share their experiences with cognitive decline. It is not to provide medical advice. We are not doctors, and we stress that what might have worked for one person might not work for others. If anything you hear on this program inspires you to explore treatment options, we recommend you do so in consultation with your physician.
Well, hello and welcome to another segment of Living Our Best with Memory Loss. Today's guest is Glen Kyle from Franklin and Kyle Elder Law Attorneys here in Knoxville.
And thank you all so much for having me. I'm very excited for this.
And also joining us today is Gabe Blake, who is a social worker with the law firm.
Hello.
I have a personal connection with today's guest because my wife and I saw Glen Kyle for our own legal needs. Like so many people, we had done nothing by way of a will or any future planning. And since the future is coming a little faster these days, we were advised that Glen would be the person to talk to.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for joining us. I think it's important to start out by just asking, what is an elder law attorney?
That's a very common question and, an important one. I mean, most of your types of law have been around for, a good 200 to 700 years, right? And elder law is relatively new. It's 30 to 40 years old. I mean, the core is estate planning to some extent. So that's power of attorneys, advanced directives, wills, different types of trusts. But where estate planners were really historically focused on making sure that people didn't pay estate and gift taxes, the exemptions for that are really high. If you've got less than currently $14 million, that's not particularly relevant. It's going to go down at the beginning of next year to 7 million a person.
It's not relative to us.
So that's going to take it down from 99.7% of people that don't have to worry about it to 99.3. But at the same time, for long-term care costs, that's the biggest financial expense that most people have to face now, and Medicare doesn't pay for it, right? And so with that, Medicaid and VA can be the 2 programs that can help pay for it, but they have financial and other really complex qualifications. So elder law in its kind of basis is the estate planning plus the knowledge of the public benefit programs, how to get them, how to be able to get care. Our firm's a little different. We're a life care planning firm, basically. And that means that we also include social workers. And so what we'll do the whole thing from Susie, our first social worker, would say we would find, get, and pay for care, right? So we've got social workers that can do the care advocacy. A lot of times it's really hard when you need to get a caregiver at home and you don't know which agency to look at or which assisted living to go to or which nursing home to go to. If we don't like the care that we're getting, if we want to go to a care plan meeting, if I show up as the attorney, I get a very different reaction at a nursing facility than if a social worker does, right? And
Makes sense.
Yeah, and then, the other thing is I can make really wonderful, complex plans on how to get care, but accepting the care, being able to know when to make those transitions to help families through that. I mean, that can be as big, if not more important. So that's what the social worker does. But then the last thing that we do is we actually help people get on Medicaid, right? We have certain strategies that we can do to accelerate qualification, and then we actually handle the applications, we handle the appeals. But elder law in general is going to be the estate planning plus the public benefits, which is really important.
First thing that comes to my mind with what you're saying that you do, which is amazing. I mean, I never thought of any of it. What would be the cost of all this for someone coming to you?
Well, it's going to really depend, right? I mean, usually the first meeting, we'll charge $450 to sit down for 2 to 4 hours. I'm sorry, well, we're on camera. 2 hours, but I'm a little famous for, let's just say, generous with my time. But I like to get it there. But it can be anything from a few $100s for power of attorneys and advanced directives, up to, depending, people in our field could charge $17,000 to $20,000 for a year with a renewal going forward. That would be for full Medicaid application for everything else. So I don't charge that much. I'm a little bit lower than some of the others, but it really can be a broad difference in price depending on what you need.
I grew up around attorneys all of my life, and I never realized how individualized things were until I started working with a firm. And each time I'm in a consultation with Glenn, really seeing the way he will do planning very specific to people's needs. So it does vary.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that Bob's first question out of the gate
It was how much?
was about the money involved.
yeah.
It can be expensive, but if we accelerate qualification for Medicaid for the nursing home for 2 to 3 months, we've usually paid for ourselves, and after that, but some people don't need all of that. Some people just need the estate planning. Like, everybody needs a power of attorney, right? For finances or an advanced directive for healthcare. Most people need at least a will. And so, it's both of those things.
How soon should somebody come see you or find an elder law attorney upon a memory loss diagnosis?
Pretty much immediately is the way I would put it. I mean, so even before, my stepdaughter's turned 18, and I was waiting with power of attorneys, right? Anybody.
Birthday.
Yeah, pretty much. Right. Anybody can get in a car crash, and if you get in a car crash, somebody has to be able to make decisions for you. And once you're of majority, nobody can do that legally without having documentation, right? And so the only other option would be to sue somebody, remove their rights. That's a conservatorship. We usually want to try to avoid that, right? Because that's under court supervision. It's more expensive. And so it doesn't have to be an elder law attorney, but I'd recommend everybody have a power of attorney in place, and a healthcare power of attorney or advanced directive, somebody to make medical decisions for you. Now, some families, all of these are very individualized, these plans. So what I'm going to say is kind of generalized. But in a lot of situations, there's transfers we can do in trust or things like that. But Medicaid's going to have a 5-year look-back period. Some VA benefits have a 3-year look-back period. The sooner that the sooner you can kind of do that pre-planning. Now, there's other planning you can do when we need help tomorrow, right? But some of that's kind of less efficient. And so we've got more options on the table if we're talking earlier.
So, Glenn, you mentioned an irrevocable trust. And for folks that don't know what that is, can you just define that?
Yeah, great question. Let me take a step back to what is a trust, because before I was a banker or an attorney, I just thought that's what all the bad guys in the 80s movies had, right? So a trust is a separate legal entity, right, that can own things. So it's not unlike a corporation or a partnership or a charity or a church, in that it's an entity that the government kind of thinks is a person, even though it's not really a real person, right? And like those, a trust can own checking accounts or savings accounts or houses or cars or stocks or bonds or pretty much anything that you could own, right? The difference is where corporations exist to make money and where charities exist to do a charitable purpose, trust exists to manage money for someone's benefit. So the purest version, I have a 3-year-old. I'm very old for that, but she's awesome. So there you go. If I pass away, I want to leave money to her, but I don't want a 3-year-old with a checkbook, right? And when she turns 18, I'm still not going to want to her a checkbook, right?
So smart.
Yeah. So instead of, if I die, leaving money to her outright, I can leave money to her in a trust, right? And the trust basically is going to divide the control of the asset from the benefit, right? So every trust has 3 roles. The person that sets it up, makes the rules, and puts the money in it. That's the grantor, the settlor, the trustor. That's me, right? And then it has the person that's in charge of the money. That's the only person that can invest the money, spend the money, to do anything. That's the trustee. That might be my sister, right? And then in a trust, you also have a beneficiary. That's the money. That's the trustee has control of the money, but it's not their money. They're legally required to spend it on the beneficiary and only the beneficiary. That's my daughter, right?
Right.
And it's a little bit more complicated. It's for her lifetime, and then I get to determine who gets it when she dies. Sometimes we use those if we want to go to our daughter, but we don't want it go into that no good son-in-law when she dies, right? We would go to the kids. That's a usage for the trust too. So trust can either be set up while you're alive or not until you die. The one I was talking about for my daughter, that doesn't exist until I die, right? So the most common type of trust is called a revocable living trust. And in that one, I'm the one that sets it up. I'm the one in charge of it, and all the money's for my benefit. I can amend it, revoke it, or kill it at any time, right? So it's basically just an alter ego. Those are really good for avoiding probate. There's also really good if we need to get a bank to be I don't have a good power of attorney, right? I mean, we got a lot smaller families. We have a lot of people that don't have a good power of attorney. If you need to hire a bank or a trust department, revocable trusts are really good for that. But for Medicaid purposes, if I'm in charge of the money and I can spend it on myself, it's going to count, right? So an irrevocable trust is a trust where I give up enough power that Medicaid doesn't think it's mine, right? Or the IRS, depending on which type of planning you're doing, right? But, well, for a Medicaid trust that I would use, usually the IRS does think it's mine, but Medicaid doesn't, right? So I'm keeping more powers than if I just give all the power away, and I get more protections, but I'm giving up enough power that it starts that 5-year look back period. So whatever I put in there 5 years later doesn't count for Medicaid. It doesn't have to be spent down. They can't come back after it. So in that one, I can't be the trustee. I can't be in charge of it. And I'm not the beneficiary. Usually we're doing this with kids, or other family members. That's why this isn't a one size fit all. There are families that come in that we do not mention that this exists as a possibility, right? We need everybody, but in a lot of situations, it's a way, instead of when people want to take the farm and give it all to the family, if it goes into an irrevocable trust and one of those children die, it's still protected. If one of the children gets divorced, it's still protected. If they go they get sick, lose their job, go bankrupt, it's still protected while it's still in there.
And for that reason, you'll often call them asset protection trusts, right?
A lot of people call them Medicaid asset protection trusts. The other thing is for capital gains. If I have a family farm that my dad bought in 1960, right, and I sell it, I got to pay capital gains on the difference between what he bought it for and what he sold it for, right? If he owns it when he dies, we get a step up in basis, and the basis becomes not what he had in 1960, but what it was worth on the day he died. Right. And so if I sell it right after that, there's no capital gains. But if if my dad gives me the farm during his lifetime and then he dies, he didn't own it when he died. So there's no step up in basis. If I sell it, I've still got to pay cap gains back to 1960. But we can set up an irrevocable trust where I gave up enough power that Medicaid doesn't think it's mine, but I kept enough power that I still get a step up in basis. Right. So short story, I went into way too much on that.
No, that's good. That's good stuff.
Short story is it's a way that if we do have an early diagnosis and we've got a family that's appropriate for that, we can give some, but not all of the assets away, start that 5-year look back period. So it doesn't count for Medicaid and be able to and be able to avoid them coming back after you die with the state recovery. And I'll tell you the other thing about that, and this isn't just elder law, right? I think that's such a hard diagnosis, and y'all know that much better than I do, right? But I'm getting your team together and all hopefully rowing in one spot is the most important thing. That's more important than the best doctor or the best attorney or the best social worker. So being able to have those conversations and figuring out what you want, and be able to coordinate. A lot of times we'll talk to the financial planner, we'll talk to the CPA if we need to, we'll talk to, sometimes the kids. Now, the client's the client, right? And they control the representation, not the kids. But at the same time, a lot of times being able to have those conversations and try to bring everybody together as much as you can on the other part can be really important.
Yeah, the support system. I think and when you get a diagnosis, I know when I got a diagnosis of breast cancer, it feels out of control.
Absolutely.
And it almost starts to feel helpless. And what I've learned in my life is that hope is built through action. And so when I got that diagnosis, having my documents in place, seeking good counsel was a way for me to feel like I could do something to improve my situation. And I think that's the gift of legal counsel, even just looking at medical counsel. It gives you some sense of hope and some sense of control over your life.
One thing that comes to my mind is, and I kind of felt this way after my diagnosis, I didn't want to think a lot had changed. And I wonder that I would think that sometimes you hit resistance from the person that has just gotten the diagnosis, where their care partner might be, okay, we're going to, them taking action feels real good to them, and they're wanting to get things lined up, as early as possible. And yet the person may not be in that spot at all yet because they're grappling with having the diagnosis and thinking, we don't need anything special. I'm still me, and I just wonder if y'all encounter that a lot, and how do you meet the needs of both the care partner and the person with the diagnosis? How do y'all deal with that?
Great question. Plus a lot of, what 40%, I think the last I saw, people have anosognosia. So they don't know the part of the brain that's able to tell that they are having some of those changes is self-affected, right?
Yes,
so
I was going to ask you to explain what that term is.
Yeah, so they are just completely unaware that they're having those changes, right? And
anosognosia.
Yeah, so it's a huge. When my first day at working at the firm, I got to figure the different types of social workers and anosognosia. That was they did not cover any of that in law school. But no, I think it's a fundamental question. The most important and a lot of times hardest part of all of this is, number one, the client's the client. We want to be at the level they're at and support them, make sure that they understand the options and give that to them, right? But over the journey, so, a lot of times being able to give support without having somebody come in and take over and not listen or include is really, really challenging, right? I mean, we've got, I'm going to tell myself, my sister is a district attorney, right? She is the best advocate you could ever have in your corner ever. She's a bulldog. I say that because she went to Georgia, right? But if it came to being the power of attorney, I'd be a little bit nervous because the first day I'm like, okay, you're appointed power of attorney. And she's like, okay, give me everything. I'm ready to go, And so I was like, well, yeah, I can still kind of do this. Right. I mean, so being able to transition from that position, from getting maybe just a little oversight to make sure I'm not double paying or missing my bills, to getting to the point where I need more support, to getting to the point where the person's kind of doing it for you. That whole care transition is vitally important, and it's really hard. But we try to, that's one of the reasons we have social workers.
Yeah, we talk a lot about the legal and the practical. So I do more like the practical side of what does that actually look like to make that care transition. How can we educate not only the person who is living with brain changes, but also their care partners and stakeholders about what is the right to self-determination? How does a sense of autonomy and self-esteem impact these changes in their needs? And so we do a lot of balancing that of we want to support those people who are living with the brain changes, but also to give that support for the families too.
Yeah. And early on, you want to make sure that when you're picking a power of attorney, when you're picking a trustee, you're making sure you have the architecture that when you need it later, that person has the authority. But we want to pick our agents really carefully, and we want to have conversations with our agents, and we want to go through that to try to advise them on that transition. But that's a great question.
My mother has a dementia diagnosis, and I wasn't sure, when is it time to bring in home health care? Should I go into my long-term healthcare program for my mom. Like, I didn't know, and should I have turned to an elder law attorney? Would that have been something I should have done instead of trying to, which was almost impossible, get in touch with the insurance company? I mean, talk about a feat. So that is something that maybe you would have done, your
Yeah, I mean,
firm?
The life care plan attorneys have usually on their staff someone like me, someone who's a social worker, elder care coordinator, and a lot of what we do is help people navigate care.
That was my,
When
I
is
needed
the
help.
right time? Yes,
Good,
exactly.
good. That's great to know, because that's what I needed help with.
And there are some geriatric care managers that are not connected to attorneys that are out there too, but it's a huge need. It's just a huge need that's not being, that's it's really hard to kind of find help with.
Yeah, the Alzheimer's Association put out a study early this year that looked at one of the greatest areas of need in healthcare is care navigation. And
Absolutely.
so what we
I
are
see it.
hoping is that more people in all areas of practice are starting to incorporate those people into the work.
I will say this question of like, who is an elder lawyer? How do I find an elder lawyer? It got kind of popular. So suddenly we have people that, are generalists that are putting that name on there, or some people that don't really do it every day. There is a certification for specialists in elder law. There's 500 and something of us in the country. You can find that at NELF.org, NELF. That's National Elder Law Foundation. Those are the people that don't just practice some, but have actually, practiced for a certain amount of cases, had to do at least 16 hours a week of elder law for 3 years, and then taken another kind of one-day mini bar on this. In general, if you don't have a certified elder law attorney near you, you can also find NAELA, NAELA. .org. That's the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys, and so that'll also have people that are signed up for there. But those are two important places to look for an elder lawyer near you.
Thank you so much for what you've been able to contribute. I know this is a very complex but necessary thing that those of us in this situation have to address. And anyway, your information will also be on our website, which is livingourbest.org.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This has been wonderful. Y'all are doing really important work and great work, and I've enjoyed watching it, and I've really enjoyed being on here. So,
Yeah.
so
Thank you guys for having the conversation.
Absolutely.
Whoa, thank you.